Today we're going to be talking about the current rehabilitation scene starting from 1973. And as you know, I have divided up rehabilitation legislation and rehabilitation practice and functioning between pre-1973 and post-1973. In 1973, Congress passed what was known as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This act was developed and was legislated at the impetus of consumers who felt that they were not being served by the public rehabilitation program. And they felt they were not being served by the program because, as we have discussed, there was an emphasis on serving persons with the least severe or least significant disabilities on the one hand, and on the other hand, there had been kind of a drift, even more than a drift, but there had been a new direction in the 1960s of rehabilitation focusing in on what was known as social disabilities and focusing in on persons who were deemed eligible just on the basis of being viewed as economically disadvantaged. So it wasn't as if persons who were economically disadvantaged did not or could not or would not benefit from the public rehabilitation program. It's just that the focus in the 1960s was on including persons who might not have a physical or mental disability, but who just had the category of, or being in the classification of being economically disadvantaged. And those were the two areas in which consumers, persons with physical and mental disabilities, believed that the public program was not meeting their needs. And again, to reiterate those, I think I said those in kind of a confused way, but basically the rehabilitation program, since its inception in the first part of the last century, focused on serving persons with the least severe or significant disabilities. And secondly, the emphasis was on serving persons who were just economically disadvantaged and not needing a physical or mental disability as well. So after several attempts and much going back and forth in Congress, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was passed. And as you can see, this was a large federal program in terms of funding, and there were 5 basic mandates that were created as a result of this program that had tremendous significance for rehabilitation practice as we know it today. First was the mandate to serve persons with severe disabilities, and so the emphasis was on serving individuals with the most severe or the most complex disabilities rather than those who had the least severe disabilities. By implication, it was going to be such that serving persons with severe disabilities was going to be a more involved process, and it was going to take multiple services. And also, it would be very likely that persons with severe disabilities may have more than one disability or a combination of disabilities. There was also a re-emphasis on gainful employment as the ultimate goal, and the result of serving persons with severe disabilities was that many states had to go into what was known as an order of selection. so that if everybody could not be served, there was some priority in terms of serving individuals. And over the years, and even to this day, in 2000, the first decade of the new century, and into the second decade of the new century, I believe, the concept of trying to identify and define and set a priority for who is the most severely disabled individual or individuals is an ongoing, evolving process. But in any event, states were mandated to serve persons with severe disabilities. And many states began looking at that in terms of function. And instead of looking at the physical or mental disability itself, looked at the impact of the disability on the person's ability to function. And so our emphasis in rehabilitation is on a functional model of disability. So that was the first mandate. The second mandate, again flowing from consumer involvement, was consumer involvement. And consumers went to Congress and said that the rehabilitation program was not meeting our needs, that the rehabilitation program was focusing in on individuals who had who did not have input into the process. And through the Rehabilitation Act of '73, there was an emphasis on client and consumer, at that time client, participation with the counselor in the planning of the individual written rehabilitation program, and involvement throughout the process as a whole. Because today we know that the IWRP, the individual written rehabilitation program, has evolved into the IPE, the individual plan for employment. And in fact, consumers have the option, if they choose to exercise it today, in many states, of writing their own IPE or getting assistance from others to write the IPE. And so the rehabilitation program is such that we had, to summarize the first two mandates, emphasis on persons with severe disabilities or significant disabilities. Different states refer to that different ways, and consumer involvement. The third mandate was more of an internal mandate to stress program evaluation, and that rehabilitation agencies would be accountable for providing information to consumers about services. Out of this came consumer satisfaction surveys and a requirement that services be provided in a timely manner. A fourth mandate was to emphasize research for rehabilitation practice. The National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research was created with a goal to educate the public, to disseminate information, conduct conferences, and obviously also to conduct research, both research that would be demonstration of different techniques and projects, as well as empirical basic research. So we had applied research and we had basic research as part of the goals of what has become known as NIDR, N-I-D-R-R. And we also had the requirement, a very important requirement, to disseminate that information through various conferences, through training programs, through documents, and through peer-reviewed manuscripts in professional journals. And the fifth mandate was to advance the civil rights of persons with disabilities. And that included dealing with attitudes towards disability, and it also included trying to address some of the issues that people with disabilities were viewed as being stereotyped or being viewed as persons who were in minority groups and or minority group, and to address inclusion of persons with disabilities into the broader community. There are different sections of the Rehabilitation Act of 73. Section 501 dealt with affirmative action in hiring, federal hiring. Section 502 dealt with accessibility issues. Section 503 dealt with affirmative action by federal contract recipients. And Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act dealt with non-discrimination in programs and non-discrimination in institutions receiving federal grants. And the sections 503 and 504 are ones that had to do, 503 had to do with hiring practices of persons receiving federal monies, and section 504 had to do with non-discrimination of programs that received federal funds in some way with regard to the services and the programs that they offered. And this was very broad in the sense that it covered not only employers, but social service, educational programs, hospitals, schools, public schools and colleges. Could be private schools and colleges. But anybody receiving federal funds had to be able to be accessible and had to be able to provide equal opportunities for individuals in those programs receiving services, as well as in the hiring practices of those agencies and those programs. So basically what we have in sections 501 and through 504 were civil rights and employment rights for individuals with disabilities. And these were really the precursor to what we will see later in terms of the development of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990.